Today's reading is from the book of Ruth, chapter 3. I wonder if you've ever thought about how many women feature in the Bible compared to men, or about how many of the women are named compared to the named male characters. I'm guessing that you'd be able to list a lot of men in the Bible from memory. But if you thought about women, named women that you could list, perhaps you would get to 6 or even 10. Apparently, only 8% of the named characters in the Bible are women. This is partly because the scriptures come from cultural backgrounds which were largely patriarchal, where women had a subordinate and perhaps sometimes even invisible role. But there are places where this convention is challenged in scripture with some outstanding female characters, and Ruth is one of those who bucks the trend, as it were. This passage is unusual in the Bible as it comes from a book about women and named after one of the main female characters. Not only was Ruth female, but she wasn't even an Israelite. She was from Moab and had married into an Israelite family. If you're not too sure where to find the book of Ruth, and perhaps that's interesting in itself, it follows the book of Judges, and it comes from that historical background before Israel had kings. There are only 4 chapters, so you can easily read the whole story through if you're not familiar with it. But in outline, what happens is that Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi lose their male relatives and are thus left vulnerable and poor. They take refuge with Boaz, their nearest next of kin, and Boaz agrees to marry Ruth and thus extends his protection to the 2 women. It happens that Boaz lives near Bethlehem, and the son of Boaz and Ruth is Obed, who becomes grandfather of the great King David. Thus, Ruth, the Moabitess, becomes a member of the family tree of Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah, the son of David. It's a great story. It's a feel-good story, even though it starts with tragedy as the 2 women are bereaved and are left with no security or income and living as beggars. Ruth is loyal to Naomi when she could have abandoned her and gone back to her own people. The bonds of love survive their tragedy. The kindness and care between the 2 women is very touching. Boaz acts honourably and generously towards them. He allows them to glean in his fields, and he ensures that enough grain is left behind that they can live on. When he marries Ruth, his act is a redemptive and a compassionate act. He saves and redeems the situation. And the fruit of their union shows how much God blessed them as it led to the birth of our great Redeemer, Jesus Christ. When Matthew used the genealogy which opens his gospel, he included Ruth's name among Jesus' ancestors. The genealogy covers 42 generations since Abraham, but it only names 4 women other than Mary, if you include the wife of Uriah, whose name was Bathsheba. How amazed Ruth would have been if she knew that she was going to be part of the purposes of God, described in this genealogy as spanning generations and periods of time which we can't really imagine in our short-lived mortality. Ruth the foreigner is named here and woven into the story of salvation. God has brought her courage, her loyalty, her faithfulness into that story. Ruth would have been stunned if she knew. And how little any of us know what the long-term consequences will be of our choices and decisions and actions and lives. Perhaps it's merciful that we don't see very far ahead. I'm rather glad that this time last year I didn't know what 2020 would bring. But sometimes when life seems meaningless, and especially when suffering is great, we do ask, what's it all for? Where is it all going? How could anything good possibly come of this? And we may not ever see that outcome. It may not be granted to us to know the answer to those questions. Like Ruth, we have to just carry on today, doing the right thing, following as well as we can the path of Jesus, and trusting to him for the outcomes.